All right. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Randall Stevens. We're going to spend the better part of the hour talking about Avail. A lot of you on this call may be new to Avail and what we're do. So I'm going to spend a few minutes here at the front, kind of giving you an overview about, you know, what Avail does, where it came from, how we think about the problem that we're solving. And then ultimately, I'm going to show you some new features. We've got a brand new release. Our Avail 5.0 release is underway. So I'm going to run you through live some of the new features there. But again, my name is Randall Stevens. I'm the founder of Avail. Still work a lot with the product team. I do a lot of these kinds of calls to walk you through what we're doing. For those of you that are new to Avail, the company spun out of another company back in 2016, and the Avail software was first available in 2017. So it's about 7 years in the market. And as you can see on this from these slides, during that time, we're lucky to have a lot of great customers and partners in this journey with us. Largely, we are 100% focused in the architecture and engineering market. So you'll see a lot of, I always say large architecture and engineering firms. And even though we have single individual users all the way up to thousands of users inside firms, usually I say large because I think the problems that we're trying to solve usually show themselves at scale inside of large firms, and it becomes something that's recognized that needs to be looked at and worked on. If you're a team of 5 or 6 people and you're sitting around across from each other, you might just kind of yell things at each other and give answers back and forth verbally. But when you're a larger company at scale, and especially now that teams are distributed, maybe even in distributed office locations, teams that are working together, managing information across those teams gets harder and harder. I've got a couple of my colleagues on this call with me. It looks like they've got their cameras turned on. We're going to be monitoring this for questions. So if you can just put stuff into the chat. We're actually doing this as a kind of a live Zoom webinar. So when we get to the end, if you want to, make comments or ask questions and unmute yourself, we can do that as well. But as I go along, if there's something that comes to mind, go ahead and pop it into the chat, and we'll try to get your questions answered. When you take a step back and look at what we're doing, we couldn't have told you this 7 years ago, or maybe we would have described it a little bit more narrowly about what we're doing with the Avail platform. But in the end, we've always been trying to connect people with their information that they need to get their work done on a daily basis. It really started as, what we knew were a challenge, which was, kind of these reusable assets or resources that people need to get to. Usually these files, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of files that sit out on a company's network that for the production teams that are actually getting their work done in the architecture and engineering market became a challenge to be able to get to that information. And I think it really came to life with Revit because there were so many reusable assets over the last decade that people started recognizing that there was a need. But as I'll show you, even though we've taken a very deep dive on the Revit front, we're actually kind of agnostic to the information. The way I've always described the problem that we were attempting to tackle was, I would call it the loose content problem. And by that, I meant that, when you take a step back and look in the AEC industry, all of the tools, the piece of software, everybody's a knowledge worker. They're services businesses. It's basically architects and engineers and designers and people sitting behind their desk, behind a computer, in a piece of software, taking stuff out of their head, using this software to put it in some form. And then ultimately that work product gets usually saved out as files, which are shared or passed on amongst one another. And those files ultimately just end up being stored in a file system, right, of some type, either an on-prem network or now cloud locations. But that information is usually going out and being stored somewhere on the network. And so I always, looked at that as I call it the loose content. It's relatively unstructured. We try to use folders to organize things, but we can all think everybody probably recognizes that at some scale, it just doesn't work very well. Windows File Explorer really never got developed, any further than it did 30 or 40 years ago. Search was not that great inside of those applications and just became difficult to put your hands on that information. So that's what I meant by a loose content problem. We're creating all this information every day. It's sitting out in these file systems, and it was just terrible for retrieval of that information. So a couple of things the decisions that we made that kind of are the backbone or pinning of what we've done with Avail and how we've attacked this problem. First of all, Avail is completely content agnostic. So by that, we knew that there were very specific use cases around Revit workflows and visualization assets, but we wanted to create a platform that was agnostic to what kind of content. I like to say, as long as it's digital, you should be able to organize it and manage it and get back to it through the Avail interface. So that was the first big decision that we made, which was we're not going to just be a plug-in for Revit or a plug-in for Rhino or some very purpose-built thing for one kind of content. We set out to try to solve the more general problem inside of a firm, which is we're using all kinds of applications. It's not unreasonable to go into a firm and see 100 to 200 different applications in use in different ways in those workflows. And every one of those, right, applications are probably producing information, sometimes in proprietary file formats. And that data is what's getting stuffed, usually over in your project folders somewhere over in your network as you're producing information. And that was really the problem that we set out was to try to make that information easier to search and retrieve and see and use in the workflow. So on one sense, Avail is content agnostic. And the other important decision that we made was, even though when we launched this in 2017, the cloud was becoming a real thing. People were talking, and using cloud hosting and really starting to think about cloud locations for storage and all the benefits of storing things in a cloud. But we never really got caught up in trying to say, that your goal should be to move your content to the cloud. So really the early decision we made was really we shouldn't care where the content is. So Avail, from that sense, is an index. We index, we point to where content sits, and that content may be sitting on your on-prem network locations, local servers that are still in place, or it could be in a cloud location of some type. We don't really care. So when you think about all those files sitting in these different locations, some in the cloud, some on-prem still, Avail is this interface that's allowed you to get to that information. You'll hear me saying the things I like to say, the little sayings. One of the things I like to say is we take the where out of that a user has to think about where content is. You shouldn't have to know where it is. You should just know, can I search it? Do I have access to it? And can I use it? And that content could be being stored in any number of different file systems. And I'll give you some examples of that as we run through. So over the years, we've developed a lot of different features. We're now releasing our 5th generation major release cycle of Avail. I was telling somebody earlier, showing them some of this. I'm like, Avail did not look, for those of you that remember the day one, the 2017 release cycle, version 1, it's really evolved. A lot of great features been added over time. I put this, the next couple of slides that I'm going to show you aren't necessarily, I'm not going to dive into every one of these features, but two things. One, we're constantly evolving the platform and adding to the platform. Usually a couple of major releases a year, kind of release cycles that we're on, where we're dropping new features. I'm going to show today some of the new things, this related content and palettes that are coming out in this latest release, some major new features. But also want to, kind of highlight that it kind of gets back to the philosophy of how we're developing the app. It's can Avail access the information that the users need to get to? So we're always working on, can we connect to and handle and get to the information that you are needing to manage? can we help? Can we help to provide an interface that helps to organize that in new ways or help people think about contextually getting to it in new ways? And then ultimately, the real goal is, can we make it really easy for people to consume that information? And then behind all this, there's a lot of data and analytics that the people managing the system get to sink their teeth into and see exactly what people are using, exactly what they're looking for, exactly how they're using the system. So this is another graphic. I don't want to get too caught up into the minutia of it, but what it represents, these rings represent some of the different major features that are part of Avail. And the reason I've been using this for about the past year to help explain, but every time we add a new feature, at the heart of it, one is we think about it, are we adding more information that helps a user get to content or get to information? So you can think about these features as these kind of concentric rings around a piece of information. And every time we add some new value in a feature, it's usually about trying to add a little bit more information around the content. And that's what helps us get, help you get to that information. So at the heart of Avail is a metaphor we use. It's called channels. You can think of it like a Roku box or one of your TV services where you've got channels that you can pick from. If I'm looking for sports, I go to the ESPN channel. If I'm looking for movies, I'll go to Netflix or HBO Max. Same kind of metaphor inside of Avail. The platform lets you create channels that make sense for your firm, and then you get to basically make that the location where somebody goes to try to isolate and find resources. So ultimately, all of these different features we talk a lot about context inside of Avail. Everything is about understanding the context of what somebody's trying to do. The easiest form of that is when somebody types something into the search box. The words that they type in there are a clue about the context of what they're looking for, which is how we would execute a search. But there's a lot of other tools that are part of Avail that are all about, putting information in a channel is a form of adding context to that information. One way to think about getting when you're swimming in a lot of information, you've got to think about having tools that let you slice through that data very quickly. So a lot of these tools that we have and the way that Avail has been structured is all about taking big giant slices through all of this data to get you down to the information that you're looking for. So as we move forward, I use this slide to kind of talk about the direction we're moving in, because there's some features that are right above this, maybe hard to see, but this little red line. We're actually, as the platform's evolving, we're moving into the project side, I'll say, of the house. So all of the tools, for the most part, that we've developed with Avail have been around organizing and accessing the resources, the reusable assets. And if you think about the other side of the house, is where's the actual project work going on? So we're going to be introducing some new features that are around providing that context of the project. And then it's going to allow us to bring the right proper resources to the project and ultimately to the people working on those projects to get their work done. So rather than going searching and swimming around, looking for data, we think that we're in a position to start bringing that information to the user. So that's been a big theme of ours too, which is instead of you going to the information, we should be smart enough that the information comes to you. But that takes a lot of context and a lot of information that in order to do that well. So that's just a little bit of the background about how we've thought about how we think about this problem in general. There's with this release cycle and moving forward, there was kind of two big problems that are now kind of that we see in front of us that we've been trying to solve. One is that ultimately a lot of this information that we're talking about that lives in the form of files and URLs and documents and all of this information that's out there, we've treated those as if they're like little islands. They're individual files, and we've kind of built Avail around helping you find those individual files. But the reality is that a lot of that information is actually interconnected in one way, either explicit connections or implicit connections between this information that's really, kind of sitting back there on your networks. So you'll see one of the newest features of Avail is what we call related content, and I'll show you some examples when I give a live demo. But the whole concept there is that we can begin in the database to make and form relationships between information. And I like to say that it is the first form of us actually pulling information to the user. Because if a user goes to finds one file, and then kind of attached to that through this related content concept, other files are being drug along. You can think about that as in this way that we're pulling information to the user or dragging that information along instead of them having to go find each one of these individual files on their own. So information is connected. And then ultimately, as I've said, information, you would love to wave a magic wand and say, information comes to me when I need it. So as we move forward, we're trying to automate much more about what's going on in Avail, get the resources in, get the right context around that information. And with the right context of all this information, we should be able to start driving information right around the user contextually with what they're doing in real time, so that they can, be more efficient at the work that they're doing. So so if I go back to this graphic that I was using, up till now, Avail has been a single pane of glass interface that gave you a view to go find these assets that sit out on the network. But the reality is that those pieces of information that are sitting out there actually have these kind of connections with one another. So that's why the related content concept, we think, is important. And we've just now put that structurally, I'll say, the database in place that's starting to do that. And then ultimately, once this is all in place and we understand what the user's doing, as they're working, we can begin bringing this information to them in the right context at the right time when they're doing their work. So an easy example, probably the first stuff that we'll be doing is, you could imagine if you're working in Revit and we know the project type that you're on, then I'll use the word, we could build a dynamic library in real time from your overall firm-wide library based on the information that we know that they've used in that same project type before. So rather than going to dig around in old projects, which is what a lot of people do, because that's the most familiar that they can go put their hands on it, we think that we can begin teeing up that info in real time based on not only the project type, but maybe all the way down at the room level, and also down at the individual user level. So there's a lot of interesting info that we can see by what people are doing in Avail that will allow us to start to do that. All right, so hopefully description gets your wheels. I'm sure everybody's thinking different things as I describe that in their head, but that's good that you can kind of tee it up and ask some questions. So I'm going to kind of turn to an overview of what the Avail 5.0 features are. We're going to concentrate on that. When I pull up the application here in a few minutes and give you a demo, I'll show you the basics of what Avail does. So for those of you that are brand new to it, you'll at least understand the basics of the interface. And then I'll spend a little bit of time for those of you that are familiar with it and show you these new features and kind of concentrate on that. And then we should have plenty of time here at the end that we can answer some questions if you have them. So I'm just going to kind of quickly go down this list and then I'll pop over to the app and show you. But this concept of related content is the major new feature initiative that we've been working on. So we have a nice interface that lets you, I'll say today it's kind of a manual process that lets people make some relationships. But as we learn the kinds of relationships that people are making or wanting to make with the content, we'll be doing then the follow-on work to try to automate as much of that as possible and automate the connection of that information. The important thing to understand is the concept, and that we've now got the ability to store those relationships in the database. So now we just need to know the use cases and the stories that people say where this will really be valuable. So that's out in this new 5.0 feature. We've also introduced a new concept called palettes. Palettes, I like to call them like little buckets. It's like user generated. So any user in Avail can create a palette. It allows them to march around to all the assets and resources that they can find in Avail, and they can add those resources to their palette, to their bucket. So think about it as at a project level. Somebody's doing work or a small team's doing work. Somebody can generate a palette, go grab resources, might be some drafting views from the detail library, could be some materials from a material library or models that they want to use, and then they can throw them into that palette, and then they can share that palette with a colleague or just use it themselves in their workflow while they're working on the project from those assets. So, and then you'll see there that I've got a note that there's also, and I'll demo this, but we actually have a PDF exporter now. So the use case that kind of drove this feature was a customer explaining that a PM on a project who's not actually working in Revit wants to be able to go into the detail library, pick out details that want to be used, throw those in the bucket, throw them on a pallet, and then actually export those so they could go do redlining and Bluebeam. So we added a PDF export capability. You can do your redlining, and now the workflow is to hand that palette back over to a technician, somebody doing work in Revit with the red lines, and say, here's the details that I want you to use, and here's the red lines to go mark them up inside the project. So that was the user story that kind of drove the development of that feature. But people are already finding lots of different uses for those palettes as we put them out there. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but one of the technical things that Avail is able to do, when I pull the interface up and show you, if you haven't seen Avail, we take a lot of pride and a lot of recognition in that all the content in this market is very visual in nature. So we try to do our best to show the best thumbnails, the best high resolution views of all this content that we can in the interface, because we understand that seeing is half of it, of starting to understand that information and move it around. So part of that process that Avail does is we have the ability to actually extract the thumbnail from a file. So I'm not going to get into too much. We could do a whole hour on the way thumbnails actually work and the way the operating system handles them. But Avail actually extracts and abstracts the thumbnail away from the file so that you can search and see without actually having to open up the file and grab the thumbnail. So it's really what makes Windows File Explorer really slow, especially in cloud-hosted environments, that you actually have to pull the file down in order to get the thumbnail out of it. So we do some very specialized things. This version of it is automatically virtualizing these thumbnails as they come out. We've actually, instead of relying on Windows to tell us what those thumbnails are, we've written about 30 of our own thumbnail handlers. So a lot of the major CAD and visualization packages, popular file formats, we took like the top 30 and said, let's go do our own work and make sure that we can pull the thumbnails out of those files. So that's in this 5.0 release. Often asked for was this ability to create it. We've always supported SSO, like Azure. We've supported SSO and we've supported Azure groups for managing sharing of information in Avail. We've now introduced our own user groups, so you can still use Azure if you want to, but you can also generate groups within Avail. We've beefed up the user profile. I'll show you when we get into the app what that ends up looking like. It's really laying some groundwork for the next stage, which is as we move into these project groups, these what we call workspaces. Who becomes the most important part of that? So teams and who these people are. So we're building up better profiles of who the users are inside of Avail, so that as these workspaces come to life, you'll be able to start to see who's working on the project. It'll also affect the way next steps are as those user profiles get generated, that we'll be able to start to connect that to the analytics, which lets our admins start to look at the analytics just in some new ways about who the users are. There's some really cool new long sought sorting and filtering options, which I'll show you. We've improved the multimedia support. We have a built-in browser that actually lives inside our Avail desktop application, and we've swapped that technology out to what's called WebView 2 from Microsoft, and it's giving us a lot more multimedia support. So we can natively play a MP4 movie right inside the application. We can render a GIF file. It renders our URLs and all that. So there's some improvements to the multimedia support that's happening there. And then just a couple of, there's an audit tool, and everybody's probably tired of hearing AI this and AI that on everything, but we too are working and doing a lot behind the scenes with some new AI and machine learning, mostly around, I'll say, applying it to data and structuring data. We're doing some really interesting things that are being very productive around auto tag generation, auto organizing of metadata behind the scenes. But we've also been digging into these large language models on the front end. Part of that is, I was on a call earlier and I just said, we try to stay healthily out in front of this. I don't want to get blindsided because there's a new expectation for how maybe some of this new technology is going to allow you to search for information. I'm not going to claim today that we've got that all figured out, but we have been working for about a year and a half on integrating large language models and using those on the front end. If we have time, I'll show you some quick demos about what that can look like. But in the Avail 5.0, the first kind of production release of using an LLM is we've got a new help bot, and it's powered by behind the scenes by all of our customer success team, knowledge base, help articles, and all of that. So there's some new cool ways that you can just ask it questions, and it'll tell you how to do certain things in Avail. And it's actually pretty slick. Clay and his team on the customer success team and Todd have been hammering away at getting all that, getting that in place. All right, so I'm going to go out of the slides now, and I usually hate to spend that much time in a slide deck, but sometimes you just have to lay the groundwork. So the first thing, for those of you that are new to Avail, I usually start with this Avail desktop minimized like this, just so you can understand that it's an application that gets installed. So the best way that I can describe it is instead of going to Windows File Explorer to look for stuff on your network, you would open the Avail desktop app, and that becomes that interface to that world of information that's back there. So the files still can stay, they are stored somewhere on a file system, and then Avail just frees up the front end of that to make it searchable, but also to organize it and look at that information in new ways. So if you're used to things like Excel, think of it as like a pivot table almost, or a new front end to that data that's stored back there. We've all, for the last 30 or 40 years, been constrained to folders and subfolders as the only way to try to organize that info. Those files still get stored back there, but we free up the whole front end about being able to get to it. So I'm going to go full screen with this just so you can see it. This is that metaphor of channels that I was talking about. So this is our demo account. We tend to have a lot of different kinds of content so that we can demo whenever I ask a question and kind of show different use cases. But I'll just filter down and show you just a couple of classic kind of use cases. So if you are using Revit, I can have my Revit library. So if I click in, these are what we call key cards, and actually you'll see here, this is what I meant by attention to graphics. We try to, and this is all automated, the ability to push these key cards. It's all driven off the metadata of the files that are being managed in here. But we've tried to develop these nice front ends for the architects and engineers that are out there to be able to, drill in and get to this information. So it kind of acts like they're folders, but this is completely freed up from the constraints of where and how that data is stored. It's just really metaphors for, jumping in and drilling down really to this information. So here you can see that I've got doors. We've got a little breadcrumb, what we call the breadcrumb trail, that's up here, kind of like an address bar that you might be used to. But if I went to something like, specialty equipment here, that's a catch-all kind of category in Revit, if you're familiar with Revit. And now you can see up across the top, we've taken the tags or metadata that live on this content, and we can elevate it into the interface that just makes it easy to filter and get to this kind of information, right? So, I could browse. This is what I would call browsing mode. I can kind of drill into the interface and browse and go look for information. But, if I wanted to, if I was looking for this pizza oven, something related to that, if I go back to the home screen, I could have just started my journey by typing in, I'm looking for something related to pizza. So what's happening right now is that search just went and searched across every bit of the info that I had in Avail. So one, you can see how quickly that search happens. Go try to do that in your Windows File Explorer window. Go to your network and go to the top folder and type in a search into the Windows File Explorer for pizza and see how fast or how long it takes for it to crawl across all that information and get you back a result. So we're very concentrated on those fast search results. And this, we brought back the content, but across the top, we brought back the context of where we found that information. So, I can tell you which channels I found that in and let you now filter down or drill down into those. And if I double click, this actually takes me into that channel where that was found, and I'm into that channel with that piece of information. But if I went back out front, I search for something that's going to be a little more noisy in the search results, like the word door. Now all of a sudden I got 4,000, almost 4,300 results back for the word door. So this is where these kinds of filtering capabilities get more important. It's like we're ranking these based on certain criteria, whether it was in the name or in the tags. But across the top is where it gets interesting, that we can say, well, I'm going to bring you back some contextual clues to show you where we found these results. So it might be, is this the Revit full library in your harvested library? Maybe it's your doors and your door families in the Revit library, or maybe it's over here in the manufacturer content that you were looking at, and I'm going to filter out by manufacturer stuff that matches on door. So we're always trying to bring that information back. In this example, if I was looking for in my Revit library, again, I can double click to go into that library. Now, all of a sudden, we've narrowed that down and said, well, we found doors in a lot of different kind of situations. There's special equipment with doors. There's Revit category of doors. There's detail items that are related to doors. So I'm just going to go into the doors, and here are all my doors, right? And I could either use additional filters to filter this down or browse this content. And if I'm in Revit, let me pull Revit up real quick. We do have an add-in that it's called the Revit Project Navigator that lives inside of Revit. So if I select this door, I could do one of two things. I could either drag it in, or you can see that usually I've got this on my second monitor plucked over here. I could select that door or multi-select doors, and this would allow me to do things like bulk load both of those. Or I could select one and say, I want to pop up the type catalog viewer. So one of the concepts that we do in Avail, this one only has a single type, but a lot of times, if that was like let me go use a piece of casework as an example. Like if I were looking for casework that had a door on it, and I select that piece of casework, now if I look, here are all the types. So one of the things that a lot of our customers do once they begin using Avail is it allows the users to not bulk load extraneous data into their projects and bloat their project. So this is a simple example of that. There's all these types, but if I knew that I was going to place this, we also let you search. So if I knew I was on looking for level 1, I can go to this floor plan. I'm just navigating inside the project now. And now if I wanted to bring a single type in, I can just pick that and drag and drop it. You'll see a little check mark show up. I actually placed the 36-inch wide unit, and that check mark signifies that that's now loaded into the project. More importantly, these others are not loaded into the project. So everybody's always fighting project bloat of all this data coming in. So we've taken a very proactive approach to bringing data in only as it's needed, which helps to keep this clean inside of the Revit environment. While I'm here, just to show you a couple of cool features. Now, if I was looking for casework inside of this project, we're showing you everything that's in the project. We'll actually show you content, the types that are loaded, and then we'll tell you whether they've actually been used or not. So in these examples, as I open up these types, you can see that there's one instance of this 36-inch. So we actually have an instance navigator. So now I can open this up and say, go take me to that. So that'll take you right into the project for where that piece of casework was placed into the project. So there's some really nice features that we've integrated that should be useful as part of that kind of Revit workflow and Revit add-in as far as navigating the information once it's in the project. All right, so let me go back now to this doors example, and I'm actually going to use this to show you this this related content feature. So over here on the right-hand side, there's a new icon. If you're used to seeing Avail, you'll see a new icon for this related content view. And you'll notice on certain pieces of content, that icon's going to show up. That icon is the related content signifier, which means that piece of that file has other information connected to it. So there's a couple of ways I can either click that icon, it's going to open up that side panel, and it's going to show me now down below other information that's been connected to that file. So in this example, and I'm going to open up, the other way to see that is I can open up what's called the content view by clicking on the name. Now I've got a floating window that can float around. And now I've got sheets that might be related to that door. So you might have your doors sheet that wants to come into a project, again, be connected to this. You could connect URLs. So this may be like basis of design choices for like ASA Abloy is maybe your preferred door supplier. So you could connect to those kind of and deep index into specific places if you wanted to on external websites. But you can do things like, attach details that might want to go along with it, materials, basically anything that's in Avail, you can now relate to one another content-wise, including URLs. So let me just give you, so that's one example inside of like your own internal library. I'm going to show you, we have an initiative for bringing manufacturer content into Avail. So we have what's called the marketplace. Conceptually, what you can think about the marketplace in Avail is you're organizing all your own data inside of channels in Avail. Our marketplace allows us to bring in outside sources of data right into that same environment with your own content. So you got one place that you're looking and searching. So we have a manufacturer initiative going on called Avail Select. So I've already got those channels turned on. So I'm now going to go back over here and show you that if I went into, we've got it broken up between architectural and MEP. We got a lot of MEP content that's begun to flow in. But as an example, I can actually filter now by which content has related content. And I'm going to pull up this family of a valve. But what you see connected to that are the technical data sheets. So like product catalogs, product brochures, could be installation manuals, operational kinds of information that wants to go along with it. Could be the certifications that want to go along with it. What's important about this is not just the relationship, but from a technical standpoint, those documents we did not pull those down and we're not storing copies of those. It's actually the original system point of truth at the manufacturer's website. And even though you've brought in this Revit family and start using it, we have the ability in Avail to now keep those documents attached to that item all the way through the life cycle of it being used in your project context. How many times have you downloaded something like a PDF and a year later either questioned or found out that was out of date and it's been updated or something else has happened back on the manufacturer's source of truth? So we're really working hard from a technical standpoint to solve that problem and working with the manufacturers to help them understand the problem so that this information can be connected and pulled through and stays connected. Even though you may pull these down, we'll have the ability in the future to like let you know that there's an updated version of that you might want to update. Will, I see you raised your hand. Was that a long time ago?
Uh, you're in the flow, man. I don't want to disrupt the flow, but Dave has had a couple of good questions here back on the Revit workflow, and I get these a lot when I'm doing kind of demos and discovery calls with people. So I thought it might just be a good opportune time that
Sure.
maybe everybody might want to know about when you are. Let's say you've loaded a piece of casework, and I'll just read Dave's question. If you've loaded a piece of casework, do you get a warning that the family or type is already loaded in that project? And I know that we've kind of tried to intentionally mimic some dialogues and thought it might be good to specifically answer that question and also just talk about the general approach to that behavior.
Yeah, the first thing you would find is if it was already loaded, our interface will still pop up and let you place it, but we're not actually reloading. We're just using what's already in the project. If you do try to bring in or reload the family, we rely on Revit will do what Revit does, which is ask you, what do you want to do? Do you want to write back over top of this or skip over it? So we rely on Revit to kind of handle, it'll pop up its normal dialogues. No different than if you had, just drug that family in off the Windows File Explorer. It'll ask you if it's already loaded. Do you want to replace the types? Do you want to write over the parameters? What do you want to do on that front? So we do the same thing. We don't disrupt the flow. If it's already loaded and we you pick that and our type catalog shows up, you'll see little check marks by it. You can still use that interface to place it, but we're not like trying to re-bring that. We're just basically referencing the one that's already in the project and letting them place it in that flow as opposed to bringing in new data. Only if you hit load, which would be the bringing that data back in, would it then prompt you, do you want to write over top of your parameters or whatever? So I think that answered the question. If not, pop back in clarification.
He's teeing you up, man. He's really got, this is another good question.
Stump
In
the
line,
chump. This is stump the chump, right?
in, in line with the manufacturer content, has Avail or anyone else vetted the family or content? We'll just say the content generally for use to limit potential for model corruption.
So very, very difficult loaded question. So the answer is yes. Almost all of the content that's currently in Avail Select was all built by one company, a company called EngWorks, which specializes in fabrication ready models and does a lot of work for these manufacturers. So EngWorks has built most of that content. So at the very least, if it's wrong, it's probably all wrong. But they do build content. You know, they're aware of all the issues and they're building it correctly. Uh, the challenge, right, that we're all going to have is that there is no one person that builds the content. Sometimes manufacturers have somebody in-house that's maybe built their content. It's a really hard to walk in there and go, you built all this stuff wrong. We're trying to get to the point where it can at least pass some minimum standard before we are very particular. We know that we can't, this isn't going to turn into Revit City where it's just anything goes. So we're very aware that there needs to be some quality standard. Doesn't mean that it can all be exactly the same, but it doesn't want to be bloated. It doesn't want to, meet certain criteria. So we're slow walking into this with that awareness. And then we've got a relationship with EngWorks and other partners on that side of the equation that we're trying to, and we're having some really good conversations though with manufacturers about what really needs to be done to do this the right way. And the big thing for us is we're not trying to become another aggregator. So we're not trying to become another, like, we're not trying to convince the manufacturers that you have to put your stuff here because everybody in the world comes to Avail looking for content. We're actually, the story for us is we've got a lot of great customers who do a lot of projects in the market. You should deliver them your information the way that they're now digesting the rest of their information. That's the first part of the story. And then we're trying to conquer these next level problems, which are that this information needs to stay connected. If something changes back upstream, can we notify you back downstream that there's been an update? So, if you think about every time you go out somewhere and download something, whether that was a PDF or Revit family, you basically made a copy of the file and you ran off and did something with it. You have no idea if that's been updated, deprecated, has something wrong with it, all those types of things. So we're really working on trying to keep this information connected in those ways. More, Will?
Um, Pierre was making a comment about classification systems, especially for international teams, and I suspect that we were kind of basically touching on it in a roundabout way, that it's complicated and you have to deliver this with a certain degree of fidelity and across for multiple different types of audiences.
Yeah, if I turn just along those lines, if I turn on my key cards for these channels, here's the full library, but we're using Omniclass as the major classification system for this content, mainly because it's the way that the manufacturers produce their information. They a lot of times are using Omniclass classification system for that on that front. So this is actually Omniclass level 1. So if I go into general facility service, this is actually Omniclass level 2 categories, the official categories. So we're trying to put really good metadata that's driving this stuff so that we can be consistent. But as an example, if I go into valves, you'll see across the top then all the different manufacturers of valves, from NIPCO to Kits, Clayval. So we are having some good luck. Because of EngWorks relationship with a lot of these manufacturers, there's a lot more MEP, like I said, than architecture. but we're working on that architecture side to get more and more kind of what we would refer to as architectural content available as well. So it's going to be a slow process, but it's a two-sided problem. We need to know that you all want it and want it delivered well, so that we can go to the manufacturers with that leverage and say, here, it's worth doing, and here's why. So uh, it's going to be a continuing process on that front. You can just bust in, Will, when there's something else, but I'll just show you a couple of those other features. One is we've added some new sorting. So now instead of these channels being by name, I could actually organize them by who the author was, or I can see which channels came in last by date. And that also applies to when I go into for and turn off the key card. This is showing up in here alphabetically, but I can also say, show me by the last content that was added. So now your sorting is by last in. Let me see what's new, basically, to the channel. So there's all kinds of new ways. And last thing that I'll show you, and then I'll show you these chat bots. But in the user profile, we've actually taken what used to be only available, what we call our managed portal, which was on the get avail domain that you had to go do some. We've actually pulled that now into the app. The profile, this is what I was talking about. Every user can see their own profile now. So we've got first name, last name, job title, department, and office location. Those are not random. Those are actually standard Azure ADFS uh, uh, metadata that's often stored at ADFS inside of corporate systems. So we pick that up and bring it forward. But if that's not available, the users can just update this stuff themselves. But this is what's going to lay the groundwork for what it looks like. You can actually see, watch this. If I go to a channel now and go to the information tab on that, you'll start to see little hints of us like, oh, initials, and I've got editing privileges. Here's the group that's been assigned to it. But you'll start to see this showing up as we move into the project side about who the people are that are working on certain things. And then the other thing inside of that is that new ability to create user groups. So now right inside of here, I could create a new group if I wanted to. I'll just call this the webinar group. And I can create a new group. And then in that group, I can just add members from my team to that. So it allows you to create these new groupings, and those groupings can then be used to share things like a palette or a channel, who can see it, and create small groups. So we still support the ADFS side of it. So if you're using groups on that side, large groups across that scale, across a company, but this lets you kind of create your own smaller groups that you might not want to have to go to IT to have to do inside of ADFS. You can do it with AVAIL. So I'll delete that, and I'll delete the other one I did this morning. Okay, the other major feature, and then I'll show you this check. I'll kind of tease you with what we're doing with these LLMs. But here's the user create a palette. Unlike channels, we use administrative kind of top-down feature. Palettes are designed to be ground up. The users should be able to create their own palettes around their own workflows and their own small teams that are working on a project and do something with it. So again, I could create a new palette, or instead of creating a palette to start, let's for back in my library. I'm going to go over to my drafting views in the library. Here's all these drafting views. I might say I'm looking for, door jam, and just you can see previews of these things, which is a really nice feature over here on the right. But I could multi-select 2 or 3 of these details, and if I right click, I can add those to a palette. So those were the existing palettes I had, but I could also just create a new one. So I'm going to call this my webinar group again. I'll just name that the palette. So I just created the palette, and I can now copy the items. So we use the word copy. It's still the source of truth in the library. We've just copied a reference to that on the palette. So now when I go over to my palettes, again, there's where my date sorted comes in handy. The latest one shows up first. So here's my webinar group with those three details. Now I could say, hey, Will, that's working with me on this project, I'm going to add you to this palette. He gets a notification that says he's got a new palette. And now in his interface, he sees these three items. And then over here on the right is this new PDF exporter. So I've opened up added this detail. I could add a new page, add this detail, create another page. You can actually put more than one if you want to on a single page too. So I'll put two on that page. But now I can export that to a PDF, which I'm then going to take in and maybe do some redlining on. So I'll call this web group.pdf. Save it. It's generating the PDF. It's going to save this out. You'll see this pop up because it's going to ask me where it put it in the downloads folder, but I could like open that up and move it or save it somewhere. But this is where I would go open it up and do my redlining, right, in Bluebeam or whatever your PDF software is of choice. And then, either through Teams or whatever communication, pass that on to Will and say, hey, you've got the palette. Here's the red lines for that. Go do your work. So then once you're in this palette, you'll notice that over here in Revit, your workflow, I could go multi-select those if I'm working in Revit off my palette and load all three of those at once into my project. This is that example of we'll throw those normal Revit warnings up, but now I've brought those three details into my project where I can now go do work on those. So we're really working on the workflows. We feel like we've tackled most of what's needed for the resource allocation and the resource searching. And now we're really putting more attention over in the project workflows. We're going to be introducing this concept of workspaces in 2025. That's our plan. And so the last thing, and then I'll just see if there's questions. The new help shows up right up here at the top. It'll open up a new window. This is our new little help chatbot. So I could ask it, something like, how can I add a tag to content? And it's going to, pull from the resources behind the scenes and give me an answer to that about how you do that in Avail. So here it comes, tells you how to manually do it, how to do it in bulk, what are the different ways that you can add tags and tools that we have for doing it. So it gives you an overview of all that information. It'll also, you'll see down at the bottom, link me to where the resources are in our system for that. But it's also pretty cool because I was testing it the other day, like, why would I choose to use a palette instead of a channel for organizing content? So it's pretty good. This is where, to me, I use the word compelling. This new technology is pretty good because not only does it understand what palettes are and what channels are, but it's using the info that we've written behind the scenes to now compare the two and then give you suggestions for why you might want to use one over the other in certain circumstances. So really interesting, kind of use cases. Here's the overview. Here's the palettes. In summary, the choice between those depends on the scale, purpose of the content, right? So this is where it gets interesting in my mind. And then just one more thing. I'll show you examples. I'll start with like HR. So we've been experimenting and we've got some customers experimenting with if I've got content in Avail. So in this case, I've got Avail's HR handbook, those documents that are deep in content, but rarely does somebody read unless they need something or go dig around in it, or all of our health insurance information. So now this chat bot that I'm opening up over here on the right is only talking to these documents. For those of you that are familiar with what's going on, this is what's called RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation. So it's using an LLM to interpret my question. It's searching these documents for the answer and then bringing the answers back and using the LLM to present that. So if I said, who manages our HSA, health savings account, for those of you that are in the US, health savings account, and how can I contact them? So I could ask a question, and this is being sourced from those documents as the source of truth for that information. So it's not going out to the internet and doing a bunch of stuff. So here it is. Here's who's managing that information. Here's their contact. But I could also say, you know, can I, reimburse myself for glasses that I purchased with my own cash last year? So this is a real thing. I brought these glasses and I didn't have my HSA card, so I wrote a check, paid with a credit card out of my own. I just recently asked this because I'd messed around and hadn't reimbursed myself, and it gave me the directions for how to go from my HSA, transfer money over, right, to be able to do this. So this stuff we may see this being integrated into Avail. For us, it's interesting because it's a new way to think about querying information out of these systems when you get a lot of this info. So we're doing a bunch of work keeping track of that. So now I'll see if there's questions. Will.
Oh man, we're having a party over here.
All right.
Let's see. Joe, I'm in the middle of answering you, but so my brain is frozen because I can't type and talk at the same time. Let's go back to palettes, and Joe, I'll get back to you because you're asking us some interesting things that I'm sure other people would like to know about. Um, Natasha asked, are there different levels of permissions for shared palettes?
No. Um, and it's an interesting conversation. We've designed these to be very, I'll call it flat, user generated around projects. And I use the word temporal, meaning they may be here today and gone tomorrow. I want to use it temporarily to do some part of a workflow, and then maybe it wants to go away. Uh, there is a desire that we are not handling for another form. And I don't know if it's going to end up being a palette grows in features or channels mature in features, but there might be this ability to create another bucket of things. Let's say it was a channel, but that channel is restricted from people adding additional content to it and share, then you could share it out. So there's some in between things that you're probably kind of getting at about what maybe is needed. Um, we're also talking about right now you can delete a palette. We're actually talking about actually not letting you delete palettes. We would basically archive palettes, but just basically make once they're created that they can't be deleted. Right now they can, and whoever's been given access to any palette can delete it. So it's meant to just be small team kind of tool. But as people start to use it, they're probably going to try to use it for things it wasn't really designed for. That's the nature of the beast. And then those conversations is usually when, hey, could you add this to it? It's like, well, maybe that's not the right place. Maybe to solve that problem, there's another way to for us to design the system to solve that. So we get into interesting conversations around those kinds of things.
Um, so Joe is asking, and Joe and I are kind of chatting about this if people want to read the chat, but this is something that I talk to people a lot with, which is migrating or transitioning from existing CMS solution, XYZ, whatever they are, into Avail, and what is the time involved, and specifically how will it be done. So I can tell you in my experience, there are a couple things that you should always think about. And again, this is something that's in the chat, but moving data from, solution A, into your file system and into Avail is not a time consuming effort. You more than likely already have that information on your file system and you've just copied it into that other solution. Sometimes people have net new content in their existing solution, but getting it down into your file system is not a time consuming effort. And then moving that data into Avail can take minutes, right? That's not complicated, moving the data around. The time that people spend is the strategy behind how do I want Avail to be organized? How do I want people to arrive at content and drag and drop it? And how is our solution going to enhance their current workflow or create new opportunities? And so that strategy is what takes time, and it can take a couple hours, or you can spend a month with us. It's kind of up to you all as the design technologist for your company, I can say without hesitation that the people inside of our ecosystem and client base that generally have a higher rate of adoption and a quicker time to value are firms that have moved from a previous content management solution. And it's just kind of embedded in your culture already. People are used to the idea. The business is already supporting it, and they're just picking up a new interface, right? So you're teaching people new buttons on a seemingly new screen. So the transition is easier. All
Yeah,
that is about, yeah,
I'll just
go
throw
ahead.
in, Will, the most popular was a lot of people, used the Unify system. Unify predated Avail a half dozen years in the market, so there was a lot of early adopters that used that system. Obviously, if you've kept track or are one of their customers, you know that Autodesk bought that and has now become a different pared down solution inside the Autodesk ecosystem. We've moved a lot of Unify people off the Unify platform. You can actually export that metadata right out of the Unify proper and right into Avail and not lose any of that metadata. We've had some very large firms from soup to nuts move from one system to the other over a 30-day period of time without missing a beat. And most of that had practically zero, as Will was saying, to do with actually the data transfer. It was more like, how do I want to take advantage of the other things that Avail has to offer and to work through the best way to do that and then ultimately introduce it. And but we've moved a lot of people over from those systems. So it's usually not a problem.
And to Joe was kind of mentioning some of these things, data transfer, like, you know, tags, custom tags that you might put on content in Unify or anything else for that matter. You can, export that to Excel, and then we can reapply that information. Joe asked about groups, which I think are probably going to be could frankly be a little bit more complicated because you got to know where that group lives. You got to know who's a member of that group. That group could be in your Active Directory. You could create custom groups, and then you've got to know where all those groups are, how they're mapped to all those specific channels in your old solution and then mapped into ours. And so there's probably just a little bit of discovery and diagramming that we need to do with you guys in advance in order to make sure that that's a pretty seamless transition. But when you're moving, large groups of people from A to B, it's just part of the service and part of the solution with us.
Yeah, for those of you that are Excel jockeys on the call, you'll get excited about this. We have a feature called Tag IO that lets you leverage Excel or any other spreadsheet application. You can dump your metadata out at a channel level. That's what I'm showing here. I just dumped out, you know, 3,500 whatever piece of content and its metadata out into a spreadsheet. I can do data munging here and shove it right back into Avail to update all that information. So we've got a lot of tools to help you, kind of manage this info and data. Once it's in there, then there are some features like built-in editors like this that allow you to further kind of organize and manage data in different ways. But bunch of tools, data tools that are behind the scenes. And like I said, our ability to import data from external sources through these what we call tag import tools, make it pretty easy to transfer data.
Dave was firing away, but he had to run to another meeting.
All right. Anything else teed up there, Will? We ran
Not
over
at the
a little
moment,
bit.
but if anybody would like to unmute and ask a question, I'm game for that too. I
Yep.
don't have to be the MC.
Stick around as long as you want.
Yeah. Thanks, Pierre. Pierre just gave some compliments and said he would share some further ideas soon.
Thanks, Pierre. Good to see you. All right. Well, hearing no questions, I guess we can call this afternoon quits. Thanks, everybody. Uh,
Rick,
yeah.
Rick, pop one in. Is 5.0 still a preview or generally available?
Still in preview, which is basically our beta release cycle. We plan to release it into production in December. So here in the next, better be in the next 30 days. But the first half of December is the target to get it out the door. We're buttoning up a few bugs or last minute bugs. We usually put it out in these preview releases to let our customers kick it around in their environment and report back if they're seeing anything strange. So we get the last stuff buttoned up and then it comes out.
And I just, for everybody here, if you would like to spend some time with us or directly, just email me and we cover a lot of ground in these, but if you want to get into some of the specific things that relate to you all as individual businesses, happy to do it.
All right. Thanks, everyone.